Introduction to the protagonist. Aisha stood by her bedroom window, watching the city lights flicker in the distance. She had always dreamed of making a name for herself, of stepping beyond the confines of her small, traditional neighborhood and chasing the ambitions that burned within her. At 23, she had recently graduated with honors in journalism, determined to uncover stories that mattered, to be a voice for those who had none. Her world was filled with books, late-night research, and long discussions with her best friend, Zoya, about their future. They had promised each other that nothing, not society, not traditions, not even love, would hold them back from achieving their dreams. Aisha imagined working for a prestigious news channel, traveling to different places, and writing about injustice, courage, and truth. She was never afraid of standing up for what was right, but there was one thing Aisha had never expected, that her own life would become a story of oppression and deception. Born into a conservative household, Aisha had always known that tradition played a significant role in her family. Her father, Mr. Raza, was a respected businessman, a man of strict principles who valued honor above all else. Her mother, a quiet and obedient woman, had spent her entire life following the rules set by her husband. Aisha, however, had always been different. She questioned things, challenged outdated customs, and believed in carving her own destiny. Unlike her elder sister, who had willingly agreed to an arranged marriage at 20, Aisha had openly declared that she would marry only when she found the right person, someone who understood her dreams and respected them. Her parents had never openly opposed her views, but she could feel their silent disapproval whenever she spoke about her independence. Lately, she had sensed a change in the atmosphere at home. Her mother seemed unusually tense. Her father had been having hushed conversations with relatives, and even her younger brother, who usually shared everything with her, was avoiding her gaze. Something was wrong, but Aisha couldn't quite figure out what it was. One evening, while helping her mother prepare dinner, Aisha decided to ask directly, "Ami, is something going on? You've been acting different lately." Her mother hesitated for a moment before forcing a smile. "No, Beta, everything is fine." But Aisha wasn't convinced. That night, as she sat at her study table, jotting down notes for an article she was working on, she felt an unsettling sense of unease. It was as if her life, which she had carefully planned, was about to take a turn she wasn't prepared for. And she had no idea that the storm was closer than she thought. The family pressure. Aisha sat at the dining table, stirring her tea absent-mindedly. The air in the house felt heavy, as if something was about to happen. Her father, Mr. Raza, cleared his throat and exchanged glances with her mother. Aisha knew this look. It was the same one they had given her elder sister before announcing her engagement. "Aisha," her father's deep voice broke the silence. "We have made a decision." Aisha put down her cup, her heart pounding. "What decision, Abu?" Her mother sighed, her hands trembling slightly as she placed a tray of sweets on the table. "Your engagement has been fixed. You are getting married in a month." The words crashed over her like a tidal wave. Aisha blinked, unable to comprehend what she had just heard. "What?" she whispered, her voice barely audible. Her father's expression remained stern. "It's time you settled down. This is a good match. He comes from a respected family, and his parents approached us with the proposal. We accepted." Aisha's hands curled into fists beneath the table. "You accepted? Without even asking me?" Her younger brother Ali avoided her gaze, while her elder sister, who had gone through the same ordeal years ago, simply sat quietly, her face unreadable. "This is how things are done in our family," her father continued. "We know what is best for you." Aisha's mother reached for her hand. "Beta, he is a good man. You will be happy." But how could they know that? How could they decide her future without her consent? Aisha felt the walls closing in, her dreams slipping away. Just last week, she had been planning her career, and now she was expected to plan a wedding instead. She pushed back her chair, standing abruptly. "I don't agree to this." Her father's gaze darkened. "You don't have a choice." The finality in his tone sent a shiver down her spine. This wasn't a discussion, it was a command. Aisha realized in that moment that her freedom was no longer her own. Mysterious behavior of the spouse. Aisha had expected challenges in her marriage, but she hadn't anticipated this. An eerie silence, cold stares, and a growing distance that made her feel like a stranger in her own home. From the very first night, something felt off. Her husband, Zayan, barely spoke to her. He hadn't smiled during their wedding rituals, and now, even in their new home, he seemed distant, like a man trapped in his own thoughts. He would leave early in the morning, returning late at night with vague excuses about work. When Aisha tried to start a conversation, he would nod absent-mindedly or respond with short, clipped sentences. There were nights when he would sit alone in the study, the door slightly ajar, whispering on the phone. Whenever Aisha approached, he would immediately lower his voice or end the call. One evening, she decided to ask directly, "Zayan, is something wrong?" He looked up from his phone, startled, as if he hadn't noticed her standing there. "What do you mean?" "You barely talk to me. You avoid eye contact. It feels like you don't even want me here." Zayan sighed, rubbing his temples. "It's not that simple, Aisha." "Then make me understand," she pleaded. But instead of answering, he simply muttered, "You wouldn't understand," and walked away. Her heart sank. What was he hiding? Was it another woman? A past he couldn't let go of? Or something even darker? Determined to find the truth, Aisha started paying closer attention. One night, while Zayan was asleep, she noticed his phone buzzing repeatedly. The screen lit up with a message. "We need to talk. This can't stay hidden forever." Aisha's breath hitched. What secret was her husband keeping from her? The rain tapped lightly on the window pane, an eerie rhythm that seemed to set the mood in the dimly lit apartment. Mara stood at the counter, her fingers tracing the edges of a cup that had long since gone cold. The day had started like any other, but something had changed. A strange tension lingered in the air, one that she couldn't shake off no matter how much she tried to distract herself. She had been cleaning out an old box of forgotten trinkets in the corner of the living room when her hand brushed against something hidden beneath a stack of yellowed newspaper clippings. At first, she thought it was just another relic of a past she had long tried to forget. But when she pulled it out, she realized it was a letter. Old, yet somehow familiar. The envelope, sealed with a wax emblem, had no return address. The paper itself was thick, almost ancient, and the ink inside was a dark shade of blue. As Mara read, her heart skipped a beat. The letter was addressed to her, at least to someone bearing her name, but the handwriting was unfamiliar. "Dear Mara, you've always been good at following the signs, but this one is different. This is no ordinary path. It's a choice you must make, and it's one that will change everything. Follow the number in the bottom left corner, and you'll find the key. It's not what you think. I'll be waiting. S double quote." Mara's hand trembled slightly as she turned the letter over, expecting to find something more. And there it was. A number, handwritten in the same blue ink, 4705. Confusion twisted inside her, but curiosity drove her forward. She had no idea who S was or how they knew her, but she knew one thing. This was no coincidence. The mention of a choice, a key, and the cryptic message left her with more questions than answers. As she stared at the letter, the silence of the apartment was shattered by the sudden ring of her phone. The display showed an unknown number. Her pulse quickened as she hesitated, then answered. "Hello?" A voice, barely above a whisper, replied. "You've found it, haven't you?" Mara's throat went dry. "Who is this?" The voice chuckled softly, the sound sending a shiver down her spine. "Does it matter? What matters is you found the letter. Now, you need to follow through." Before she could respond, the line went dead. Her fingers gripped the phone tightly, the weight of the moment sinking in. She looked back down at the letter, at the number scrawled on the corner. What did it mean? Who was this mysterious person who seemed to know her so well? And why did she feel an undeniable pull to follow the trail that had just begun? As if on cue, there was a knock at the door. Mara froze. She didn't move, didn't breathe. Who could that be? and why now? The knock came again, louder this time. Whoever it was wouldn't leave. Against her better judgment, she stood up slowly, her feet almost reluctant to carry her toward the door. With each step, the tension in her chest tightened. As she reached for the handle, her mind raced with the possibilities. Could this be the next clue? Could this stranger have the answers she sought? With a deep breath, she opened the door. Standing there was no one but a small, unmarked package lying on the doorstep. The wedding had been a grand affair, but beneath the surface, everything was wrong. Mara sat at the table, her fingers twisting nervously around the edges of her wedding band. The guests around her laughed and chatted, oblivious to the storm brewing in her mind. She had been forced into this marriage, a union with a man she barely knew, all because of a promise made long before her birth. For weeks, she had tried to make sense of it. Her family, with their old traditions and their secretive ways, had never truly explained why this marriage had to happen. The man she had been wed to, Ethan, was a stranger. His cold, calculating demeanor only intensified her fear. He wasn't cruel, at least not in the way she had imagined. He was distant, emotionally detached. But what truly unsettled her was how everything about him felt like a carefully constructed mask. It was during the reception, amid the cheers and toasts, that Mara overheard something that made her blood run cold. "Did you hear about the letter?" a woman whispered to another guest. "The one her father received? It's not just about the alliance, it's about revenge." Mara's heart skipped. Revenge? What could that possibly mean? She leaned closer, trying to catch more of the conversation, but the woman's voice dropped to a near whisper. "They say Ethan's family. They're not who they claim to be. They've been hiding something dark." A knot twisted in Mara's stomach. The truth was beginning to unravel, but it didn't make any sense. Why hadn't anyone told her? Why had they kept this from her? Her thoughts were interrupted as Ethan appeared beside her, his face as unreadable as always. "Is everything all right, Mara?" he asked, his voice smooth but distant. She hesitated, then forced a smile. "Just a little tired," she muttered, not daring to speak of the overheard conversation. Ethan didn't seem convinced, but he didn't press further. Instead, he nodded and walked away, leaving her in a sea of unanswered questions. The whispers continued to gnaw at her mind. That night, when the guests had finally trickled out and the mansion was eerily quiet, Mara found herself standing before the family vault, a place that had always intrigued her, but one she was never allowed to visit. Something was calling her. The door to the vault creaked open with a force she hadn't expected, and inside, the dim light revealed stacks of old, weathered documents. One caught her eye, a letter with the same wax seal she had seen earlier, the one on the mysterious message sent to her. It was addressed to her father, and in it, a chilling truth was laid bare. Ethan's family wasn't just part of the prestigious lineage her father had promised her to. They were the descendants of enemies, an old rival family who had been at odds with hers for generations. The marriage wasn't about alliance or status. It was a means of settling an ancient family feud, one that had left blood on both sides. Ethan's parents had been the ones responsible for her uncle's mysterious death years ago, a death her family had always believed to be an accident. But the letter revealed the truth. It had been murder, planned as an act of vengeance. Ethan had been raised in the shadow of this dark history, a puppet, unknowingly bound to fulfill his family's revenge. And now he was to marry Mara, to complete the cycle. Her heart raced. She was not just a pawn in a marriage. She was the final piece in a much larger game, one where the stakes were higher than she could have ever imagined. The truth was more horrifying than she had ever believed. Mara's nights were sleepless, filled with haunting thoughts and conflicting emotions. Every inch of her being screamed for freedom, yet every step she took toward it felt like a step closer to an unseen danger. The more she uncovered, the deeper she seemed to sink into the mire of her family's dark history and the web that had trapped her. The weight of the forced marriage had been unbearable since the ceremony. Ethan, though distant, was not unkind. But kindness, she realized, was a facade, a part of the act he was forced to play. His silence spoke volumes. His willingness to comply with everything, to not ask questions, only deepened her suspicion. Was he a willing participant? Or had he too been ensnared by his family's thirst for revenge? One evening, while wandering the mansion's dimly lit halls, Mara found herself standing before a door she had never noticed before. It was tucked away at the far end of the hallway, hidden almost deliberately, as though it was meant to remain undisturbed. Her breath caught in her throat as she reached for the handle, her pulse quickening. The room beyond the door was small, almost barren. The only thing that stood out was an old chest, its wood cracked and aged with time. She hesitated, her mind warring between the urge to leave the past buried and the overpowering desire to understand what had been hidden from her. She took a step inside, the floor creaking under her weight. With trembling hands, she opened the chest, revealing an assortment of faded letters and dusty photographs. As she sifted through them, her eyes landed on a photograph of her father, standing next to a man she didn't recognize, Ethan's father. Their expressions were not of friendship, but of an unspoken tension, as though they were two forces forced to coexist, yet filled with bitterness and resentment. On the back of the photo was a single word: betrayal. A chill ran down her spine as realization struck her. The marriage wasn't just about a long-standing feud, it was a forced reconciliation, a price her family had to pay. They had tried to bury the past, but now the past was rising to claim her. Just as she was about to examine more, she heard the distant sound of footsteps echoing in the hall. Panic surged through her, and she quickly shoved the chest shut, wiping her hands on her dress. She had to leave. She couldn't stay here, couldn't stay in this web of lies. But she also couldn't run, not yet. She had to learn more. She had to know the full extent of the darkness her family had kept hidden. She turned to leave, only to find Ethan standing in the doorway. His face was unreadable, his eyes dark and intense, like they had been the moment they first met. "I knew you'd find it," he said softly, his voice tinged with something she couldn't quite place, resignation perhaps, or a plea. "I knew you'd start asking questions." Mara's heart thudded painfully in her chest. "Why didn't you tell me the truth?" she demanded, her voice trembling. "Why did you let me marry you knowing what this was?" Ethan stepped closer, his presence overwhelming. "I didn't have a choice," he whispered. "I didn't want this any more than you did. I'm just as trapped as you." The words hung heavy in the air, thick with the weight of their shared burden. The man standing before her wasn't the one she had believed him to be. A stranger, a symbol of power, a weapon for revenge. He was a victim in this, just like her. But the realization only brought more confusion, more pain. If Ethan was as much a prisoner of this family feud as she was, then what did it mean for her? Could she trust him? Could she even trust herself? Her struggle deepened. The walls that had once felt like they were closing in now seemed to stretch far beyond her reach, as if the whole world was in on a secret she had yet to understand. To escape, she would need to unearth the truth. But the deeper she dug, the more she risked losing herself entirely. What if she wasn't strong enough to uncover it all? "What happens now?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Ethan's eyes softened, but his answer was cryptic. "We do what we must. We keep playing the part, for now. But one day, Mara, you'll have to choose. Will you run, or will you fight?" The conflict inside her intensified. She wasn't sure if the answer was within her grasp yet, but she knew this. No matter the cost, she would discover the full truth. And when she did, there would be no turning back. Mara's world felt like it was closing in, every truth she uncovered only adding layers to the tangled mess of her life. Yet, in the depths of her isolation, there was one person she hadn't confided in, her younger sister, Lila. Lila had always been the curious one, the one who asked the questions Mara had never dared to, the one who had noticed when things didn't seem right, when their family's happiness was more a mask than reality. It was late one night when Mara received a message from Lila. The text was simple. I know what you found. Meet me at the old boathouse. Midnight. Mara's heart pounded. She had suspected that Lila, with her perceptive nature, had been piecing things together too, but she had never expected her sister to come forward like this. With no time to think it through, she grabbed her coat and slipped out the back door, away from the watchful eyes of the household. The old boathouse was located on the edge of the family estate, a crumbling relic of a time when the family had once spent days by the water, enjoying peaceful moments. Now it stood as a forgotten monument to the past, silent and abandoned. As Mara approached, she saw a shadow standing in the doorway of the boathouse. It was Lila, her face illuminated only by the dim light of a lantern. Her eyes were wide with urgency, and as Mara stepped closer, she could see the determination in her sister's gaze. You're not the only one who's been asking questions, Lila said softly, her voice trembling with an emotion Mara couldn't quite place. I've been digging too. I knew something was off, Mara. I just didn't know how deep it went. Mara stepped closer, her breath misting in the cold night air. Leela, what do you mean? What do you know? Lila hesitated for a moment, then pulled a crumpled envelope from her coat pocket. It was identical to the one Mara had found earlier, sealed with the same wax emblem. But this time, it wasn't addressed to Mara. It was addressed to Lila. I found this in the attic, Lila continued, her fingers trembling as she handed the envelope to Mara. It's from the same person who wrote to you. Mara's mind raced as she tore open the envelope, pulling out the letter. It was short but chilling in its message. Lila, you're the key. You've always been the one to understand what's at stake. It's not just the feud, not just the marriage. There's something more. The truth about your mother, the reason she left. The truth about everything that's happening now is buried with her. But you have to act quickly, or you'll lose everything. Mara's stomach churned. Her mother had disappeared years ago, leaving the family in a state of mourning. No one had ever spoken about her departure, and the few times it came up, her father would change the subject with an intensity that frightened them all. Mara had never questioned it, until now. There's something I haven't told you, Lila said, her voice breaking. I've been looking into Mom's past. I found some old letters in her things, ones that she must have hidden. She was connected to Ethan's family, Mara. They were more than just enemies. They were once allies. They were working together, until something went wrong. Mara felt the weight of the words crashing down on her. Allies? How could that be? Ethan's family had been responsible for so much pain, so much bloodshed. The idea that her mother had been involved, working alongside them, shattered everything she thought she knew. But why didn't she ever tell us? Mara whispered, her voice hoarse with the enormity of the revelation. Lila's eyes filled with tears. Because she was trying to protect us. She knew what would happen if the truth came out. She left because she couldn't live with the consequences of her past, and she didn't want us to be part of it. But now, it's all coming back, Mara. We can't hide from it anymore. Mara stared at the letter in her hand, her mind spinning. She had been so focused on the forced marriage, on the feud between the families, that she hadn't seen the bigger picture. This wasn't just about her. This was about everything that had been buried for years, everything that her mother had hidden to protect them. But now that the truth was surfacing, there was no turning back. Lila, we have to do something, Mara said, determination rising in her chest. We need to find out everything. We need to uncover all of it, no matter the cost. Lila nodded, wiping away a tear. We'll do it together. We'll find the truth, Mara, and then we'll make sure it all ends. In that moment, Mara realized she wasn't alone in this fight. Lila, her ally in the shadows, had helped her uncover the key to everything. Her mother's secrets, Ethan's family's lies, and the truth that could finally set them both free. Mara's world felt like it was closing in, every truth she uncovered only adding layers to the tangled mess of her life. Yet, in the depths of her isolation, there was one person she hadn't confided in, her younger sister, Lila. Lila had always been the curious the one who asked the questions Mara had never dared to, the one who had noticed when things didn't seem right, when their family's happiness was more a mask than reality. It was late one night when Mara received a message from Lila. The text was simple. "I know what you found. Meet me at the old boathouse." Midnight. Mara's heart pounded. She had suspected that Lila, with her perceptive nature, had been piecing things together too, but she had never expected her sister to come forward like this. With no time to think it through, she grabbed her coat and slipped out the back door, away from the watchful eyes of the household. The old boathouse was located on the edge of the family estate, a crumbling relic of a time when the family had once spent days by the water, enjoying peaceful moments. Now it stood as a forgotten monument to the past, silent and abandoned. As Mara approached, she saw a shadow standing in the doorway of the boathouse. It was Lila, her face illuminated only by the dim light of a lantern. Her eyes were wide with urgency, and as Mara stepped closer, she could see the determination in her sister's gaze. "You're not the only one who's been asking questions," Lila said softly, her voice trembling with an emotion Mara couldn't quite place. "I've been digging too. I knew something was off, Mara. I just didn't know how deep it went." Mara stepped closer, her breath misting in the cold night air. "Lila, what do you mean? What do you know?" Lila hesitated for a moment, then pulled a crumpled envelope from her coat pocket. It was identical to the one Mara had found earlier, sealed with the same wax emblem, but this time it wasn't addressed to Mara. It was addressed to Lila. "I found this in the attic," Lila continued, her fingers trembling as she handed the envelope to Mara. "It's from the same person who wrote to you." Mara's mind raced as she tore open the envelope, pulling out the letter. It was short but chilling in its message. "Lila, you're the key. You've always been the one to understand what's at stake. It's not just the feud, not just the marriage. There's something more. The truth about your mother, the reason she left. The truth about everything that's happening now is buried with her. But you have to act quickly, or you'll lose everything." Mara's stomach churned. Her mother had disappeared years ago, leaving the family in a state of mourning. No one had ever spoken about her departure, and the few times it came up, her father would change the subject with an intensity that frightened them all. Mara had never questioned it, until now. "There's something I haven't told you," Lila said, her voice breaking. "I've been looking into Mom's past. I found some old letters in her things, ones that she must have hidden. She was connected to Ethan's family, Mara. They were more than just enemies. They were once allies. They were working together, until something went wrong." Mara felt the weight of the words crashing down on her. Allies? How could that be? Ethan's family had been responsible for so much pain, so much bloodshed. The idea that her mother had been involved, working alongside them, shattered everything she thought she knew. "But why didn't she ever tell us?" Mara whispered, her voice hoarse with the enormity of the revelation. Lila's eyes filled with tears. "Because she was trying to protect us. She knew what would happen if the truth came out. She left because she couldn't live with the consequences of her past, and she didn't want us to be part of it. But now, it's all coming back, Mara. We can't hide from it anymore." Mara stared at the letter in her hand, her mind spinning. She had been so focused on the forced marriage, on the feud between the families, that she hadn't seen the bigger picture. This wasn't just about her. This was about everything that had been buried for years, everything that her mother had hidden to protect them. But now that the truth was surfacing, there was no turning back. "Lila, we have to do something," Mara said, determination rising in her chest. "We need to find out everything. We need to uncover all of it, no matter the cost." Lila nodded, wiping away a tear. "We'll do it together. We'll find the truth, Mara, and then we'll make sure it all ends." In that moment, Mara realized she wasn't alone in this fight. Lila, her ally in the shadows, had helped her uncover the key to everything: her mother's secrets, Ethan's family's lies, and the truth that could finally set them both free. Just as Mara turned to walk away, the weight of her words still hanging in the air, Ethan's voice stopped her. "Mara, wait." She froze, her hand on the doorknob, heart racing as the words echoed in her mind. "What now?" Ethan's voice was raw with emotion. "You don't know everything, do you? There's something I haven't told you, something I didn't understand until now." Mara turned slowly, her breath catching in her throat. "What do you mean?" Ethan stepped forward, his face pale and drawn, his usual confidence shattered. "I never wanted to hurt you. I thought I was just a pawn in this game, but I was wrong. You were never just a victim in this. You were never meant to be. You were part of the plan all along." Mara's mind spun. "What are you talking about?" Ethan's eyes darkened, haunted by a truth he had only just begun to realize himself. "I found something in my family's archives. Your mother, she didn't just run away to protect you. She left because she knew. She knew that you, Mara, were the key to ending the feud. The reason for the marriage, the reason your family and mine were bound together, was because of you." Mara felt the ground beneath her shift. "What do you mean? How could I be the key?" Ethan swallowed hard, his voice shaking as he continued. "When your father made that deal with my family, he wasn't just thinking about the future. He was thinking about the past that was buried. Your mother had a secret, one that no one knew about. You were born with a lineage that connects you to something much darker than either of our families. Your blood is the missing link." Mara's blood ran cold as his words sank in. "What are you saying?" "The feud, the vendetta. It was all orchestrated around you, Mara. Your mother knew it. She knew that your birth would trigger the rise of something from the past, something tied to both our families' histories. But she didn't tell anyone. She couldn't. You were supposed to marry me to unite us, but there was more. You were supposed to awaken something hidden. Your bloodline isn't just part of our families, it's part of an ancient conspiracy." The words hit Mara like a punch to the gut. She staggered back, her world tilting. The life she had known, the one she thought she was escaping, was just the tip of the iceberg. Her mother's disappearance, the forced marriage, Ethan's distant demeanor, all of it had been part of something far bigger, something insidious. Her mind raced. "Number, this can't be true. It doesn't make sense." But the more Ethan spoke, the more the pieces fell into place. The hidden letters, her mother's strange behavior, the oddness of the marriage, it was all connected. "You're saying that I was always meant to be part of this?" Mara asked, her voice trembling. Ethan nodded, his face filled with regret and guilt. "Yes, your mother, my family, they all knew the truth. They knew that you were the catalyst, the key to ending the feud, but also to awakening what's been buried for centuries. Your bloodline was connected to a power, a legacy that neither of our families could control. And they thought, no, they believed, that by uniting you with me, they could wield that power, use it to finally break the cycle, but none of us understood the consequences." Mara's thoughts spun wildly. She was part of something so much larger than she had ever imagined. The story of her life wasn't just about a forced marriage or an ancient family feud. It was about a power, a dark legacy stretching back generations, one that had always been tied to her. And her family, her own father, had made a deal with Ethan's family to control it. "Then why didn't anyone tell me?" she whispered, her voice barely audible. "Why didn't you tell me?" "I didn't know," Ethan confessed. "I only found out recently when I was looking through the family records, and when I realized the truth, I was trapped too. Just like you. I didn't have a choice. I never had a choice." Mara's mind was reeling. She had thought Ethan was the enemy. She had thought he was the one who had been keeping secrets, the one she couldn't trust. But now she realized he too had been a victim of this conspiracy, of the weight of the history that had been thrust upon them both. But we can't keep going like this, Mara said, her voice firm, even as her mind struggled to process the overwhelming truth. This isn't just about our families. It's about a power that no one should control. It's too dangerous. Ethan's eyes widened. You understand. You finally understand. But it's too late. It's already begun. The marriage, the bloodline, it was all meant to trigger something. Something that's been dormant for centuries. And now, it's awake. Mara's heart skipped a beat. Awake? What had been dormant? What had been waiting? Before she could ask, the ground beneath them trembled slightly, as though a distant rumble of power was rising from deep within the earth. Ethan's face drained of color. It's happening. The tremor in the ground was subtle at first, but it was enough to send a chill down Mara's spine. She glanced at Ethan, his face stricken with a mixture of fear and regret, and then back at the door to the study. She could almost feel the weight of her family's past pressing in on her, the centuries of secrets, the bloodlines intertwined in ways that no one had dared to speak of until now. Mara's heart pounded as she tried to make sense of everything, of the revelations that had shattered her world, of the twisted truth about her bloodline, and the power that had been dormant for so long, now beginning to stir. This is bigger than us, Mara, Ethan said quietly, as if the weight of the world had finally settled on his shoulders. Bigger than our families, bigger than any of this. But we can't control it. It's too dangerous. Mara stared at him, her eyes filled with a determination she hadn't known she had. Dangerous. Her whole life had been dangerous, filled with lies and manipulations. She had spent her days feeling trapped, controlled by others, by her father, by the families, by expectations. But she had broken free once, and now the choice was hers again. You're right, Mara said, her voice steady, the storm of emotion inside her finally settling. It is dangerous. But the danger isn't just in the power that's been hidden away. The danger is in letting it control us, letting our families continue to pull the strings, to use us for their own agendas. I've lived my whole life letting others make decisions for me, but no more. She took a step forward, her eyes never leaving Ethan's. He opened his mouth to say something, but she raised a hand to stop him. This isn't just about love, Ethan, or family, or bloodlines. This is about freedom. The freedom to choose what happens next. The freedom to decide who we are, not what we were born into. The ground shook again, this time more violently, and the walls seemed to vibrate with the weight of an ancient force awakening deep beneath them. But Mara didn't flinch. She was done being afraid. Mara, please, Ethan said, his voice breaking. You don't understand. If we stop this now, we could destroy everything. The power doesn't control me anymore, Mara interrupted, her voice strong, unwavering. I don't care about the power, Ethan. I care about justice. I care about us, not being pawns in this game any longer. Ethan looked at her with a mixture of awe and sadness, his eyes searching hers, as if looking for some sign that she might still choose the path he wanted her to take. The path of control, the path of their families. But Mara had already made her decision. I won't be part of this anymore, she said, her voice ringing with conviction. I won't let this power dictate my life, and I won't let anyone, not even you, force me into a role I don't want. Ethan's expression shifted from disbelief to acceptance. Mara, I understand. You've made your choice. She nodded, her heart swelling with a mixture of relief and sadness. There was no turning back. They were both standing at the precipice of something far larger than them, but she knew that for once she could walk away, and for once it would be her decision, her path. What now? Ethan asked quietly, his voice tinged with resignation. Mara's gaze turned to the door. She could hear the whispers of the past calling to her, the centuries-old legacy of power, but it felt so distant now. This isn't mine to carry anymore. She turned to Ethan one last time. I'm leaving. You should too. We need to break free, for good. Whatever is waking up, whatever has been waiting all this time, it doesn't need to define us. We can stop it. But we can't do that if we stay trapped in this. Ethan hesitated, then slowly nodded. "I'll help you," he said, his voice soft, finally free from the guilt and expectations that had held him captive. Mara walked toward the door, the weight of centuries-old conspiracies lifted from her shoulders. The world outside waited, uncertain and vast, but for the first time, it felt like a world she could own. As she stepped outside into the night air, Lila was there waiting for her. Her sister's eyes were filled with pride and understanding. The truth had been revealed, the past had been faced, and now they had the future to take back. Mara turned to Lila. "We fight for freedom, for justice, and we do it together." Lila smiled, her eyes bright. Together. And for the first time, Mara felt the weight of her family's legacy lifting from her shoulders. She wasn't bound by bloodlines or the ghosts of the past. She was free, free to choose her own destiny, free to define who she was and what she would become. The storm had passed, and in its wake, there was nothing but the open horizon, waiting for her to write the next chapter of her story. The end of one chapter was the beginning of another, and this time it was hers to decide.